session, bringing volunteers back safely. Now, I've been really looking forward to this one. We originally tried to run it back at the start of summer and it didn't work out for a number of reasons. So we are joined today by some fantastic guest speakers who are going to tell us about the processes and issues that they've experienced while making their environments safe for volunteers to return to. And in a week where we are seeing an exponential rise in coronavirus cases locally, we know it's even more important than ever to make sure that whatever we do is done as safely as possible. Now, I don't know about you, I've been kicking myself for not doing more when the rules were a little bit more relaxed over the last few months, but we are where we are, and the best thing we can do now is to look forward in a practical and optimistic way. One of the things that I found myself doing over summer, which was a really interesting experience, was on the community pop-up COVID testing sites. And, you know, in terms of volunteering and making sure that they are safe, that is probably as far to the extreme as you can get, because obviously we had people coming to us who did suspect that they were carrying the virus. And there was always that niggling feeling at the back of my mind about, are the precautions we are taking here at this site enough? Which was especially compounded when the BBC came to film us. And it's like, if this gets broadcast, are people going to comment on whether our safety procedures are enough? It's quite sort of scary to find yourself in the public eye like that. As it happens, we did get broadcast a month later on BBC 1 o'clock news, which was quite mortifying for me to be flagged up. Gail, we've just seen your blue t-shirt on TV. But anyway, just one of the fun experiences of working with our Lancashire. So over the last few weeks, I've spoken to a number of organisations, some of whom are very small, about what they've managed to accomplish over the last 6 months. And it's been really clear that groups which operate outdoors have a lot more flexibility in what they can offer. So lots of litter picking and in bloom groups across the county have been able to carry on much the same as normal due to the nature of the activities they're involved in, with active members being sort of quite widely spread in the tasks they're doing and working fairly independently. It's not been as big a challenge for them since we came out of the very strict lockdown. But as we move into the winter months, we know that people's mental health will suffer more, and we need resources in place to combat that in any way that we can. So first today, we are joined by Paul Jackson from Lancashire Volunteer Partnership, who have been integral in the reopening of libraries and museums across the county. So thank you for joining us, Paul. I know you've got a really insightful presentation to share, so take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. I will just try and share my screen with you. So hopefully everybody can hear me and can see some slides on the screen. So as Gail said, I work for Lancashire Volunteer Partnership. Just very briefly, we're a partnership between public service who wanted to provide a single gateway into public service volunteering. My role is to look after volunteers in libraries and museums. And just to give you a bit of context, currently this year, that means I'm looking after around 675 volunteers across over 70 venues, so all our Lancashire libraries and museums. And within that, there are 15 distinct volunteer roles. So anything from a museum room steward to, let's think about libraries where we've got digital champion roles that operate in libraries, or volunteers that help with baby bounce and rhyme, or home library service volunteers that deliver books to people who can't access the library. So it's fair to say most of those are public facing roles, and there's quite a variety. And I'm just going to talk about our experience since March, what's happened, what our plan is and was to bring back volunteers, and some lessons and reflections on that. So back in March, everything stopped for us in terms of library and museum volunteers because simply the venues shut and stopped operating. In April and May, we worked quite closely with libraries. Libraries offer a service called Home Library Service, where members that can't get to libraries can have books delivered. Obviously, through lockdown and COVID, all that was stopped. But we offered some of those customers a telephone befriending service. So we quite quickly in April took 150 referrals from people who used to get library books delivered. And I worked with some of the volunteers that used to deliver the books and said, you can't deliver the books, but how about making a weekly welfare telephone call and just having a friendly chat with someone? Good for the volunteers' mental health, good for the library customers' mental health. And so that took quite a bit of time through April and May. In June, my boss came to me and said, Paul, we need to have a bit of a plan to bring volunteers back. So can you put together a plan? So effectively, this restart plan to bring back volunteers safely, I suppose it had 4 principles. Number 1 was needed to prioritize the roles. So libraries and museums, which are your most important volunteers? Who do you see coming back most quickly? And then 2 other key elements of the plan were about empowering volunteers and valuing volunteers. And that was as far as possible, giving volunteers some flexibility about choosing their return, not putting them under pressure, being patient, understanding that different volunteers had kind of a different approach to coming back. And the last part of the plan was, if it was required, let's recruit some new volunteers. And so, as we all know, in these days, plans just are followed nicely and everything goes to plan. So let's look at maybe what kind of happened. Focusing particularly around empowering and valuing volunteers. So we talked with museums and libraries and understood from them what are your priorities in terms of volunteers. And the 2 key priorities were, for museums, they needed room steward volunteers. We can't open museums just on our staffing levels. We need to be supported with room stewards, so they're important. And libraries said, we're looking after our most vulnerable customers. We're not sure exactly when all our libraries will publicly open, but can we have our home library service, our people that deliver the books back? And so we got in touch with those 2 groups of volunteers, and we effectively said, do you want to come back? But rather than that be a simple question, we gave them 2 little bits of information. We gave them a framework of risk. So I'm sure you're all aware that the COVID risks are increased for if you've got certain characteristics. So if you're older than 70, if you're of a particular ethnicity, if you're pregnant, and also if you've got a disability or an underlying health condition. Now, as we were in this process, some of those government regulations changed, particularly around early June. If you were over 70, you weren't allowed to volunteer. It changed around mid-June. So what we said to our volunteers is, if you have 2 or more of those characteristics, then actually you're not ready to come back. It's not safe. But if you've just got 1, then maybe think about your return. But we also asked the second question, when do you feel comfortable to return to your volunteering? So it wasn't a simple case of your volunteer roles back, can you come back? But when do you feel able to return? And we gave people options. Some volunteers had already let us know they were raring to go and raring to come back. So we said, you can either come back as soon as possible, or you can come back later in the year, or actually you can wait until next year. We wanted to be really patient and recognize that all our volunteers are individuals and not pressure anybody. and so give them kind of options to come back. And so that communication went out, and we got a response of people who said, yes, I'm ready to come back. So we then followed up with more detailed advice and guidance to really value those volunteers and help them come back safely. And that was very specific to roles and venues. And we encouraged our libraries and museums staff to really give volunteers exactly the same risk guidelines and PPE if it was required as staff. And obviously it was venue and role specific. It did mean some changes to how the volunteering works. So for example, home library service, some of our volunteers used to go out in pairs. We said it's not going to work in pairs due to social distancing. The home library service volunteer role is all about, as well as giving books, visiting people in their home. We said you can't do that. You'll have to leave the books on the doorstep or in a safe place. So we gave quite specific guidelines. Another thing that kind of went on in parallel is we were able to offer volunteers some different roles. I've already mentioned that we offered some of our home library service volunteers a telephone befriending role when they weren't able to deliver the books. Another role in our libraries, a volunteer role, is culture hack. And really that's a young person's role, and it's about going into the library and then trying to engage other young people in creative ways in the library. That's not been an in-library role. So we tried to look at that, making that more online and still keeping those volunteers engaged. So where we're up to, or where I think we're up to with volunteers returning, it's a bit of a movable feast. But I just thought it was worth giving you some idea of progress or lack of progress, depending on which way you look at it. So we've got 77 of our home library service volunteers back, and from about now making deliveries, but we've got plenty who wanted to wait until next year. And we've also lost a few volunteers that some people have just said, actually, it's my time to stop. In terms of museums, got 54 people who have returned to their volunteering, but again, plenty still waiting. And just a recognition that for lots of our other roles that are in library roles, they're still on hold, and we're not at a point where we're able to bring those volunteers back. So just to bring it to a close and to kind of sum up, I suppose, some lessons and reflections in bringing volunteers back safely. Across 4 categories, if I think about structure, I was really glad we had a plan with some principles, but I suppose I've learned to be very flexible in that plan, and that it's been quite a slow process. In terms of supporting volunteers, I've found that just communication has been really vital. Giving them information, even if that information is, well, none of our libraries are open yet, so you're still a volunteer with us, but there's nothing you can volunteer for. As well as that, just asking, how are you? So twice in the last 6 months, we've given all our volunteers for libraries and museums a telephone welfare call just to say, how are you doing? How are things? How are you coping with lockdown? And say thank you as much as possible. Thank you for being patient with us volunteers. And when people want to stop their volunteering, thank you again, thanking them for that. In terms of the risks, we've found that kind of the general framework followed up with specific guidelines has worked really well. And then just lastly, giving options on the volunteers' return, rather than just saying, oh, your volunteer role's available, are you ready to go? Giving people options was really helpful for our volunteers. It meant nobody felt pressured, and those that were keen to return could, and those that wanted to wait equally could. And we've tried to value both those responses and anything in the middle equally. And also it proved useful to provide where we could alternative volunteer opportunities. We found that volunteers want to volunteer, and if they can't do the thing they signed up for, then actually they're quite amenable to be asked to support in other ways. So that's a little bit of our experience. I hope that was really useful and informative. I'm looking forward to hearing from another couple of speakers, but I'll stop now and I'll hand back to Gail.
Thank you, Paul. That was incredibly useful to everybody, I'm sure. And hopefully you'll be able to stick around for the Q&A session later in this hour.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Next up, we have Lisa Ross from Burnley Pendle Rosendale CVS, who have been managing the volunteers across 3 district hubs, while most of us were locked in our homes, not able to do very much at all. And they have a huge amount of experience about what has been working well in these unprecedented times. And we maybe need like a COVID bingo card, so you can mark off every time I drop in like overused terminology when it comes to COVID. Anyway, thank you for coming today, Lisa.
Thank you. Right, so I do see a lot of names I really recognise, but just so you know, my name's Lisa. I am the volunteer coordinator. I also work on an employability project. I also do some ESOL. I do lots of different sort of things within the organisation. So I support communities, I support groups, we set up charities, we do DBS checks. The list is endless. So all of a sudden, sort of the beginning, middle of March, everything stopped. And suddenly my main role was to become a volunteer, recruiter, trainer, coordinator, for about 400 volunteers. So what I thought I'd do today is just sort of tell you how we did it, tell you a little bit about what's happened sort of since July time, and a little bit about what we're going to do going forward. So primarily, as I say, overnight everything changed, my job role changed, and I was just sat there sorting out volunteers. The other thing that changed was that I had to shield. So I went from being out and about in the community to being in my front room, sat looking out the window, wishing I was out there with everyone else walking past. So first thing we needed to do was that we needed to ensure volunteers were safe, and also that we had some sort of robust training programme covering obviously COVID infection control, and that we risk assessed everything that they were going to do. So making sure that volunteers had every single bit of information that we had as it came to us, and we find that that's been really important. I was emailing volunteers sometimes 2 or 3 times a week going, government has changed this information, this is what now you should really be doing. And all the volunteers came back to us and said, actually, that sort of letting us know that information so we didn't need to go through the Gov UK site was really important. And even now we still do that for them. So if there's something we feel they should know, we let them know about it. They don't have to go looking for it. Something else we very quickly did is we started giving weekly check-in calls to all the volunteers. That's something I'll get into a little bit later, but obviously we were dealing with people who were anxious, frightened, feeling isolated, feeling like they had no control over what was happening, and that affected the mental health. And we were very, very aware that we didn't want the mental health of volunteers to suffer during that. So, as was said, we were part of 3 hub partnerships in our area, and we requested requests basically from picking up prescriptions and doing shopping through to emergency roof repairs. Whatever anybody wanted, we would deliver. Due to a lot of the volunteering, we actually had, I would say we had 95% of the volunteers DBS checked. So that in itself was a full-time job for 2 people who did an amazing job on it. But we couldn't have volunteers doing certain roles without that in place. So we had to be aware of what a role actually consisted of. So we had to do risk assessments, we had to write role descriptions, even though we were just saying, let's just go for it. Once we were kind of sitting at home going, what do we do now? It's like, well, we need a bit of a description for that. We need to know what that person's going to be doing so we can mitigate any risk that's going to be involved in it. We also gave all the volunteers the same PPE that all members of staff had, and as that changed, which it did do, regulations changed going throughout the period, we made sure that the volunteers had the right information, and we always erred on the side of caution. So personally, I realised we're going to need brand new processes. As I say, I was working from home, so no longer could I go out to somebody, sit with them, talk them through a process. I had to get them signed up very quickly. So we went to doing it digitally and over the phone. To give you an idea of how many people were coming to us, in one day I signed up over 40 volunteers. I would put the phone down, another one would be ringing up, we'd be going through the process, then there'd be one on email, and I'd be going through that process. It just didn't stop for a few months. Volunteers came to us from all different places. So we had the hubs. I'm sure you've all heard about the hubs. I don't know how much you know about them. Every time was asked to set a hub up with various partners involved so that we could respond to things. So we got together in sort of Burnley with the likes of Calico and with the likes of the council and ourselves, and it just meant that we could then respond really quickly and give the right response and give a response that people could you know, they could really use properly. You know, somebody asked for roof repairs, it's no use of sending some random 50-year-old lady with a walking stick. You know, we had to make sure we're getting the right people to the right job. I actually had nearly 1,200 inquiries to volunteer. So not only were I signing people up, I also had to talk to a lot of people. Some of them actually said they wanted to volunteer, but really they actually needed some help. They needed maybe to be put into various different organisations. A lot of people with very poor mental health, so we were signposting on that way. We did have a nice little thing that happened halfway, well, just after. Burnley thanked us by giving us a Mayor's Award in recognition of the volunteers. So that was passed on to them to say thank you for all the hard work they'd done. And they really did a lot of work. Now, since July, I've had a lot of organisations coming back to me saying we want to start up again. Really, there's three questions that people have been asking me, which are, how do I make sure that the workplace is safe for the volunteers? How do I make sure the volunteers keep themselves safe and others safe? And how do they comply with the current regulations? Quite straightforward answers, which are you need a risk assessment in place and you've got to mitigate against any foreseen events over and above your existing risk assessments. We've been going out and helping people with that. I spend quite a bit of time looking at people's risk assessments and saying, you need to have this bit in here, you need to, you know, ask yourselves these questions. Volunteers will need to be trained. You need to give them training in infection control, mental health awareness as a minimum of the usual training. As I say, a lot of people we come into contact with now might just ask for shopping picked up, but actually they might be suicidal. So we have to make sure we're not putting volunteers in a situation they're not prepared for. Hopefully they will never need to use any training we give them. The other part of that is that we made sure that every volunteer, and I actually say to everyone now, every volunteer you have should have some sort of mentor who's a paid member of staff who can catch up with them and make sure that their mental health's all right, that they don't need any sort of extra support. And the final bit I say to organisations is to go on Gov.uk and to read all the current legislation and to look on the council website which will say what you need to do next. And also all the local councils now have employees. Most of them were doing something very different 5-6 months ago, but now these employees can come out and check your organisation, your business area, wherever you're doing your work, and actually advise you before you set back up on what you need to do to be COVID secure. So, as I say, a little bit about what our team of volunteers actually did. As I say, we had 400 active volunteers covering 3 regions of Lancashire. We did 500 hours of dog walking. Now, dog walking in itself involved a whole setup process. We had to ensure that the dog owner, the volunteer, were all safe. They understood about liability and consent. We had all various forms zooming around, and people said it's just dog walking. However, if you've got a dog that's worth £3,000, you're basically walking a £3,000 little dog that might bite someone at any time. So you've got to make sure you've mitigated against everything. We did 700 hours of food preparation and food delivery. We did over 1,000 hours of just supporting the hub by answering the forms and making sure people were getting to the right place. 450 hours of just simply chatting on the phone to isolated people, which was one of the things that was desperately needed. And we spent over 900 hours just picking up prescriptions and doing errands. So you can see there was a lot of work went into it. Very quickly, we responded straight away, but we were kind of on the hoof a bit. Now, going forwards, we've retained over 200 volunteers, and they're ready to go at any time. I'm constantly quickly emailing them saying, are you still all right? Have you gone back to work? Is there any change in circumstances? They're sat there ready to go. Whether or not we're going to need them in the next few weeks, we don't know, hopefully not. But also many of those volunteers have taken up new volunteering opportunities because they've done a bit during lockdown, and now it's opened new doors to them. So as all the groups and community buildings are opening again, we're trying to ensure that as we send a volunteer to someone, we're making sure that they are safe, they feel safe, that the organisation feels safe to have them in. And it's that idea that everyone's knowledgeable and that everyone has processes and mitigation, just to make sure we are all COVID secure, and we can, going forwards, make sure that there weren't any errors looking back, but what there was a lot of work to do very quickly. What we now have is we're prepared, we're ready for it. So if it happens, the volunteers are there, and we can make sure that all policies, procedures and everything else are in place now, rather than having to do that and sign 400 volunteers up. So really that's a little bit about what we did and how we did it, and just about how we see things going forwards. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. All so relevant to the, the different kinds of volunteering that that go on across all sorts of organisations. Finally, we have Jane Ash from Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership, who's going to speak to us this afternoon. As I mentioned before, outdoor events should be easier to organise, but I think Jane is about to prove me wrong by talking about the issues and challenges that the Landscape Partnership have faced. So Jane, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gail. Apologies, people, I've just rushed from another meeting. Gail, I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully.
Yep, that's working.
Everyone can see that. So yeah, I'm just going to briefly mention, talk a bit about our project and the fact that we have not yet managed to restart our volunteering, even though, as Gail said, predominantly is all in an outdoor setting. So just really quickly, my name is Jane. I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership. If you don't know of us, we're a 4-year National Lottery Heritage funded scheme of work led and hosted by the Forest of Bowland Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. And the area we kind of cover is from sort of Gisborne in the north down to Whalley, and then across from kind of Clitheroe to Barrowford, Nelson. So we cover Ribble Valley, bits of the Ribble Valley, bits of Pendle, and a small part of Burnley as well. Normally for us, kind of volunteering and learning runs kind of throughout that whole scheme. We've got 15 different projects altogether. Our Pendle Hill Volunteers is our main group, and these meet normally twice a month, get involved in lots of different practical conservation activities, from things like meadow management, scrub control, path maintenance, habitat creation. And right now, normally we'd be getting ready for our winter season of woodland management and tree planting. So yeah, predominantly all outdoors. We normally only use an indoor space if there is one on site for breaks or when the weather gets particularly bad. So our volunteering ceased from lockdown back in March. And obviously we weren't sure what was going to happen at that point. So myself and two of my colleagues particularly were all kind of starting to plan for how we could potentially restart safely, more into kind of late spring, early summer. It was, yeah, tricky to say the least. So from the beginning, we kind of started engaging more with our northern AONB neighbours. So we created a working group with some volunteer coordinators, volunteer leaders, again trying to see what was going on locally and also nationally. So we joined the Outdoor Recreation Network, which had a lot of useful information from different organisations nationally, just trying to see what other people were thinking, what other people were planning for, keeping in touch with our volunteers. So we kind of retain as much communication with them as possible. Our volunteers kind of cover a range of different members of the public that kind of live in a range of different areas as well, locally, but also some further afield, different age ranges, that kind of thing. So just kind of keep in base touch with them to keep them in the loop of what we were planning, and also how they were getting on as well. Obviously volunteering for a lot of people, you know, it's quite an important part of their lives. So it was just making sure that they were happy with what they were doing. But the kind of nitty gritty stuff obviously involved risk assessments. So for us, with various activities, some of our outdoor activities are more high risk than others, involve the use of tools and things like that. And as well as having kind of these already implemented, we had to look at obviously COVID specific risk assessments to go alongside these, which meant thinking of a range of different things. But one of the kind of big things for us was considering activities where normally you would be closer than 2 meters, or you had to be closer than 2 meters at some point, and automatically those activities got dropped. So woodland management, for example, which we'd do over the winter, we wouldn't have planned to do that because there is a chance you will be closer than 2 meters carrying cut logs or things like that. So it was kind of those kind of thoughts to think about, you know, what was safe, what our volunteers could do safely. We also developed a health declaration form, which all our volunteers would have to sign kind of before they attended a volunteer session with us, and that was just really kind of for most of us stating the obvious, so that they weren't self-isolating, they hadn't had a positive test within the past 14 days, etc., but just so that that making them aware of thinking of all those things, and also that we had that obviously signed to say that they were posing as a minimal risk as possible to other volunteers, and also volunteer guidance. So we had to let the volunteers know that things would probably look quite differently, and for volunteer groups across the board, you know, it's as well as the activity that they've come to do for group volunteers, it's the having a brew break and having a chat at breaks and things like that. We had to explain to them. So unfortunately, there'd be no more cake and biscuits for a while, or communal cake and biscuits, let's say, and we couldn't offer brews like we normally would with our kind of brew kit. Obviously everyone would have to adhere to social distancing and bring their own hand sanitizer and stuff like that. So there was a lot to kind of think about, and we had to make sure our volunteers were happy with that. So we did send out a survey a few months ago now, just trying to scope where volunteers were up to in their thoughts for us, As well as our regular volunteers, we also had quite a bit of interest over lockdown period from potential new volunteers who were keen to be made aware of any kind of upcoming opportunities, which we think probably because more people did become more aware of their local landscape in lockdown, with kind of daily walks and daily exercise and things like that, and also the heightened issues over when lockdown kind of restrictions were lifted a bit with litter and kind of antisocial behaviour in the countryside and that kind of stuff. So these were kind of all things that we did have to think about. And we spent a lot of time developing all the paperwork, putting everything together. We are hosted by County Council, Lancashire County Council, as the Forest of Bowland AONB. So we did have to run everything past our service manager, head of service at the County Council. 2 weeks ago, we were given the go-ahead to restart our volunteering, which was great. We emailed all our volunteers. We had activities planned in. And then, unfortunately, a week would have been last week when the Lancashire restrictions and the advice came into place the advice more than anything to not mix with anyone outside your household in any kind of setting. Our volunteering was postponed again. Again, that was a county council decision, and wider county council countryside service volunteering was postponed as well. And again, that'll be reviewed as things develop moving forward. So sadly, like Gail said, even though you think potentially outdoor volunteering poses much less of a risk, it's not exactly been very plain sailing, unfortunately. We also have a kind of a range of other volunteering opportunities that this has affected. So I deliver a community archaeology project with volunteers, and they've not been able to get out for our kind of project activity throughout. I also run a Get Into Volunteering project, which is aimed towards kind of pre-formed groups from around the area to introduce them to environmental volunteering. So I've done a lot of work with the Lancashire Police Cadets from kind of Ribble Valley, Hyndburn, Burnley and Pendle. Great groups, and we had a great winter earlier on this year doing some tree planting. Sadly, obviously that's all kind of ceased. I had plans to deliver the John Muir Award with some of those cadets over the spring and summer, so unfortunately that's kind of obviously not happened as well. And the other side, I just quickly want to mention from the kind of volunteering side that we look at. So I deliver a project called People Enjoying Nature, which is an outreach project specifically for kind of mental health provision and support. So aimed towards individuals who may be suffering from ill mental health or at risk of social isolation. So I work with an NHS Lancashire Care Service on this project, and that effectively offers kind of more supported volunteering sessions. So I deliver sessions across the Landscape Partnership. We put on free transport for people where transport may be a barrier. We do, so practical conservation tasks, guided walks, creative outdoor sessions, that sort of stuff. Obviously, again, that ceased when it had to back in March, and then kind of more into the summer, I started to do some kind of individual one-to-one guided walks, kind of for those individuals that were regular participants who I thought may be more kind of vulnerable at the moment, and I know would not potentially access the outdoors by themselves. So that kind of occurred in small groups, and then I kind of restarted looking at working with kind of groups of 6, again mainly walks, but some outdoor sessions. We've recently become into management of a private site with some raised beds that need a lot of TLC, and sadly that has ceased. I had, I think, plans 0.6 to restart today actually, with that in a slightly different way, but we were going to run the minibus that I normally work with, have smaller groups, etc. But that's because of the kind of extra risk that now poses, I have cancelled that. So looking forward, I'm aiming to kind of restart some sort of individual or social working with kind of people in support bubbles, again trying to get people back out to do bits of volunteering or guided walks, in the outdoors. I think from our feedback from some of the participants that we work with, even though you know, they're coming into an outdoor setting, which is, you know, kind of lower risk. It is the kind of some of the anxiety and the confusion about what, you know, they are supposed to do, really. And so I think at the moment, you know, the guidance and the advice and the restrictions can be quite confusing to people. I think as even, you know, for my job, I'm not really aware of what I am supposed to be doing right now. And there are some benefits, you know, which kind of can outweigh the risks in some sense. But hopefully going forward, we've got to kind of look at how we can provision that. And I think that's what I've personally found, even without, you know, an outdoor setting, is I just need flexibility. We've had to change plans from kind of week to week and sometimes from day to day with what we're doing, which I'm sure is kind of across the board. But yeah, that was just kind of quite a brief rundown of how, even though in the outdoors and some outdoor organisations have restarted volunteering very successfully, and obviously some site-based services, so like Wildlife Trust, for example, Woodland Trust, where those volunteers kind of are more pivotal in the delivery of activity. They have restarted very successfully. But I know that other services, other organisations have not yet restarted. And like I said, sometimes it depends on, obviously our hosting body is County Council, and we do have to abide by everything that they kind of tell us to do. But yeah, for some people, kind of their outdoor volunteering and it's moved for some people it's moved more individual, so people are going on litter picks, you know, off their own accord, and things like that, and doing bits around where they live, which is great, and hopefully we'll have people back out kind of in the landscape as soon as possible, really. Thank you very much. It was really brief.
Thank you very much, Jane. That was fantastic. So what was I going to say next? Yeah, so I'd like to open the floor now to anyone who has questions or contributions to make to the discussion. As there are quite a number of us in the call today, it would be brilliant if you could use your digital hand to make sure I can see who wants to speak. But I'm just going to kick us off with a question that's come in on email from Lango in Bloom, who couldn't be with us today. But they wanted to know about the face coverings. So you've got your cloth masks and then you've got your plastic screens. And the research kind of suggests that the plastic screens aren't as effective as the cloth masks because, you know, people don't tend to put them on as carefully and as, you know, as they would with the cloth masks. Is that something that anyone has sort of really taken into account in their risk assessments? You know, the actual PPE equipment and what's suitable and what isn't. And it's not going to work if I can't see anything at the moment. I don't know. Lisa, Paul, is that something that, yeah, Lisa? Oh, you're just on mute.
No.
Oh, you're back on mute again.
Hopefully I'm unmuted now.
You're right, yeah.
Yeah, we looked at it. We were actually helping the local authorities get the PPE out to all the care homes and things. So it was something that we were involved in quite early on. And also because we were working in conjunction with the local authorities, etc. We had to make sure the PPE was right. We did risk assessments and I have looked at it. Some people we asked to wear both a visor and a face covering because they were doing certain roles where we felt that was suitable. Other people just a face covering. Well, I did ask all volunteers if they had any issues regarding wearing face coverings. None of them came back to say they did, but then we did get some visors in for certain roles where a face covering might not be suitable if you're dealing with somebody who's deaf. a face covering isn't suitable. So for myself, it's very much about the face coverings for anyone. It's meant to be 2 meter. The 2 meter rule is 2 meters plus, and the plus is your face covering and everything. If you're 2 meters away, you shouldn't really need any mitigation. However, we are always saying you must wear a covering, you must wear a shield. So what we've said is somebody's 2 meters away from someone all the time, wear a face shield. If you're going to get nearer, put a face covering on. Always on the side of caution, I think, is the answer to that.
Absolutely. I know when I was doing the pop-up testing, I was in Nelson Town Centre, and I had a cloth mask on and a visor, and I got chatting to a lady, and she went, oh, well, actually, I have had a temperature for the last couple of days, and there has been a cough there, and I was stood quite close to it, and I'm thinking, thank goodness I am wearing both. So do we have any other questions from people in the audience? Do we know how to do the digital hand? It's something that we don't often do. If you click on the participant button, you should be able to see a little icon saying raise hand. Ian, that worked for you.
Gail, and hello everybody. Really, I just wanted to butt in as per usual, because I can't be in one of these meetings without saying anything. I'm a bit like you, Gail. I can't help myself. But really, just to thank everybody. I know we've got a lot of people on the Zoom call today, and for those that don't know me, I've looked around. I think I know most people. My name's Ian Stewart, manager of LVP and our Lancashire. And like Gail and some of the presenters have explained, it's been a complete nightmare trying to grapple with all the different regulations and to volunteer safely and to appease all these different things that are coming to one place so that we can actually get something done. So firstly, thank you to the presenters. You did a really good job of explaining all the things that you've gone through, all the rationale for what you've done to actually get that work done and get that support to people. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I hope that's been of real use to anyone else that's listening at the moment in relation to how we can bring volunteers back safely, what sort of contributions they can make. And for me, it's been really refreshing just to hear that it's not just us that's been having all of these issues, which obviously exercises us day in, day out, that you all have as well, which is great, because it's a lot better sometimes knowing that other people are in the same boat as you are. So thank you for everyone that's joined. It's been lovely to see all your pictures on the videos and everything. So thank you very much. And I look forward to your next one, Gail, because I think before long, I don't know if we should ruin it, but we've got a special one coming up, haven't we?
I think we might have.
We have. We are going to advertise a special Zoom meet, which hopefully Gail is going to host for us, which is a special meet, the PCC Zoom meet, for anyone that's concerned in this type of business around groups, social action, volunteering. He's volunteered to come along. He's heard so much about these virtual meetings. It's obviously safe for everybody, and he'd like to come along and meet you all, and obviously to answer any questions that he possibly can. So hopefully he'll come and join us for that. And I know Gail will be contacting you shortly to give you that date and how you can join. So we hope to see you a little bit later in the month, when we hope we can pull that off with him.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
So I can't see any other hands up at the moment. So, Caitlin.
Hi, so I'm sorry, this is a really specific question, so I wasn't going to ask it, but if there's a little bit of time, I'm going to do it anyway. I work for a museums organisation, and I'm concerned about one of our volunteers in particular. And the thing that I'm concerned about is I think he might be beginning to suffer from dementia, and I'm specifically worried that he's not washing his hands enough because he doesn't remember to do it, because they're supposed to do their hands after every transaction. But if I just say to him, go home and stay away till the end of the pandemic, I'm taking away from him a thing which he does that's out of his house. And the thing with dementia is that if you stop doing stuff, you lose the ability to do it. So if it were any other situation, I'd be like, it's fine, I'll just go around after Pete and open the doors that he forgets to do, or whatever it is. But with this specific situation, I'm worried that I put him at more risk, and I'm really struggling to balance what's the right thing to do. And if anybody has any ideas at all, I would love to hear them.
That is a really good question, Caitlin. I volunteer for Townley Hall in Burnley, and so I'm sort of acutely aware of what goes on in a museum, and they are predominantly older people in ours, and we've had similar situation, but obviously not. It's not something that I've noticed sort of with the hygiene element. Is there anybody who would like to come in with any sort of suggestions for Caitlin? Just, is anybody indicating to me? It is a really tricky one. I know, because when people are in the early stages of dementia, and again, I've worked in adult social care, so I'm my grandma had it as well, so I'm very aware of those early signs, and alarm bells start ringing, but most people, I find, don't notice it till it's fairly well progressed. It's such a difficult one. For my perspective, that is such an important experience for him to be able to have. I'm just looking now. Elaine and Lisa both have your hands up. Elaine, do you want to, is it this question that you want to speak?
It is actually, yeah. Hiya, Caitlin. I work for Age UK in Blackburn. I also coordinate the Dementia Action Alliance. What role does this volunteer do specifically?
He's a front of house volunteer, so he kind of welcomes people to the museum and sort of takes our admissions money. He's been doing that volunteer role for 30 years. I've already tried suggesting, would you like to work with collections? And the answer is no. The thing that he loves doing is meeting people and welcoming them to the museum, and he does not want to be moved anywhere else.
Yeah, difficult. I mean, is there any way that there could be a mentor? I mean, social distancing makes that a bit harder, but maybe, right, because I know we brought our volunteers back to our charity shop, actually, and we've made it very clear that after every hour you go and wash your hands. If you've been handing cash and doing all of that, is there some way you could do something like that? Or, somehow try and find a mentor and go, right, not like a child, that sounds awful, but, it's a specific procedure that we brought into place to do that sort of thing. That might be one way around it. I don't know if you've looked at the Alzheimer's website. We do have some quite interesting information on there. Might actually be worth even asking through some sort of chat what they would suggest, because they are really the experts, really.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I actually haven't contacted any Alzheimer's specific charities, so I'll do that. And someone in the chat has mentioned wearing gloves. The problem with gloves is then you feel like your hands are clean, so then you just start touching your face anyway. But if the problem is stuff's getting on your hands and you're getting it on your face, you've got to change your gloves every 2 seconds. So it's the same problem, but just with like additional waste.
Absolutely. Lisa, did you want to come in and say something?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that, have you sort of given him sanitizer so that you make it that if he is handling money, immediately after you handle money, you sanitize your hands. So he will go off and wash them when he remembers, but at least he knows every single time I handle something, I'm putting the sanitizer on. He might not remember it all the time, but he'll remember it more than he will of going and just washing his hands.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion. We have got sanitizer on the desk, and I've got a little sign that's like, please make sure you do your hands after every transaction, in the hope that everyone will remember, because otherwise it's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
You're right, it is a difficult one.
Jane, did you want to come in?
Myself. I actually don't think I've got anything particularly helpful to say, but I really wanted to sympathise with Caitlin, because I do have a similar situation. I run Ribble Valley Food Bank, and one of our volunteers, who's in his 80s and had stood down during the lockdown, is now desperate to come back, but he is in the early stages of dementia, and his wife knows this and said she would come with him. But our problem at the moment is, because we're having to work in really small teams and keeping the teams very separate for all sorts of good social distancing reasons, that actually just doesn't help. And I consulted the rest of the team, who said that they really feel that it would not be appropriate, because we're small teams now, they're all having to work extremely hard. They work in our warehouse, sorting, weighing, lifting all the food donations, and it involves, you know, pretty hard work. So I've gone with the rest of the team, and at the moment this particular volunteer is still stood down, but he comes to you know, to the door of the warehouse and really wants to come and work, and it is heartbreaking. But I felt I had to go with the rest of the team. So I really do feel for Caitlin, because it's a really tricky thing trying to balance the needs of a particular volunteer as against the needs of the rest of the team in many instances. And it's tough.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Really, really tough for so many people at the moment, you know, in trying to balance everything. So I know it's nearly 3 o'clock. I am happy to carry on the Q&A for a little bit longer, but I'm just going to interject because regular attendees will know that I always mention that we're a Police and Crime Commissioner funded initiative, but today I'm not going to be the one talking about that. I'd like to introduce Chris Webb, who's the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Lancashire, who's just going to give us a few minutes of his time. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Gail, and thank you everyone for tuning in, logging on today. I know everyone's got countless things on, so thank you very much for taking the time. It's been great to listen to many of the stories and some of the fantastic work that's going on across Lancashire. We're keen to engage with as many kind of volunteer partnerships across Lancashire as possible, and was one of the reasons why the Commissioner funded and helped set up Our Lancashire, to bring organisations together, to share that talent pool and ideas, and to have meetings such as today, to have discussions and for people to brainstorm ideas. I think one thing about Lancashire is the kind of volunteers that we've got are vital for our county moving forward. We all know the impact of austerity, but it's been volunteers for organisations such as many on the call today that have really made an impact in our communities. And I see that day to day. I've just been out this morning with one Blackpool Victoria Hospital, and I regularly go out meeting many organisations. And then we also try and help with our Community Action Fund, which organisations can bid for any kind of support funding, because we all know nothing can happen without a bit of money to turn the lights on. So again, I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming on. Myself and Clive, who's the Police and Crime Commissioner, really appreciate the work you all do. We recognise the kind of importance of volunteer organisations. You know, it was great hearing some work that's been going on this call. And again, we're here to help. So if it is through our Community Action Funding grants, you can check that out on our website, or through the excellent work that Our Lancashire do day in, day out. But again, thank you very much, and I'll get back to allow you all to do a bit more Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So just in case any of you do need to shoot off in the next couple of minutes, I do have 2 other events to announce besides the one that Ian mentioned earlier. First of all, we have on the 5th of November, Rewarding Volunteers, where we're going to be looking at the different ways that we recognise the value of people's contributions, whether that's offering practical benefits, opportunities for public recognition, understanding the hidden benefits about volunteering to people's health and well-being, and going right through to the small tokens of acknowledgement that we often give our volunteers around Christmas time. We're going to be joined by Tempo Time Credits and the former MEP and current Mayor of Burnley, Wajid Khan, who will be talking about his Mayor's Medal initiative that he's introduced as a couple of our guest speakers on that occasion. I am also about to establish a new type of event, which I'm quite excited about. The East Lancashire Environment Forum. So any group or organisation who has an interest in the environment across the 6 boroughs which make up East Lancashire, it's going to be an opportunity to share good ideas and information cross boundaries, and hopefully we'll get some really inspiring guest speakers along too. So if you do have to shoot off, thank you for coming. If not, back to the Q&A. Jane, you had your hand up. I don't know if you're muted.
Is this Jane, Ash,
Oh,
Gail?
Jane Ash, yes, yes.
So, yeah. Sorry, I was just going to touch briefly on what some kind of questions, but also what we've put in place. So talking about, I guess, maybe volunteers with a range of other different needs. So something that we thought about quite early on for restarting volunteers was in terms of levels of vulnerability for individuals. Obviously we don't know everything about our volunteers. We don't know in terms of, you know, medical needs, etc. And something which some of our kind of partners across the Northern AONBs put in place, we discussed, so on our kind of health declaration that the volunteers will have to sign beforehand, it kind of specified, obviously at the time, those that were shielding, to kind of get in touch with us again. But also we kind of said, if you had 2 risk factors which put you in the vulnerable category, again, we would need more information from them, and kind of we would then have to look at specific risk assessments for those individuals, because obviously we didn't want to turn any of our volunteers away, but equally we were mindful of those added risks that, you know, for some individuals it might pose. So that was kind of something. But yeah, just out of interest, whether anyone else kind of had those similar, you know, concerns. Obviously now, well, when things have kind of over the past few weeks, obviously it's looking a bit different now, but over the past few weeks, potentially that's not been as much of a limiting factor. But definitely when things were looking to kind of restart, that was something that we were concerned about, is that we would have these kind of volunteers reaching out to us that would be classed in the vulnerable category, whether they'd like to admit it or not, or even, you know, volunteers that potentially should have been shielding. And obviously we didn't want to, again, you know, you have people that kind of aren't always, let's say, very honest with you know where they might put themselves. But yeah, that was just something that we did put in as part of that kind of health declaration. And really it was just to kind of engage with those specific volunteers as well, and like I said, do specific risk assessments where we felt they could return, but you know, looking at them more specifically.
Thank you, Jane. Anybody else want to come in or make a contribution, respond to what Jane's just said? Lisa, have you just put your hand up again?
Yes, I did, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
On my list.
Once you've told me where I can put my hand up, I never shut up. Yeah, we did exactly the same thing. So right at within a week of realising the pandemic was quite serious, things were going to be that we're going to need to make sure that we're going to nurture some people, and some people we are going to have to say no to. I put together a list as best I could to start with, and then it became quite a sophisticated list of where we could put people, what we could allow them to do, making sure they were still safe. So obviously if somebody came to us and said they were 80 years old, we'd immediately say, well, actually, do you know what? I'm sorry, you can't volunteer for us, because not that we've put an upper age limit on it. However, we do feel that you want to go and actually do something quite frontline. That's not suitable for you. However, we do have a different type of volunteering we could offer you. So we were very mindful that people will, they don't lie, do they? They just omit truth at times and say, well, yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay. You know, do you have asthma? No, I'm all right, but I just struggle a bit when I've walked a bit. So you can, so we were very conscious that we'd sign them up as a volunteer generally, but then there'd be a conversation that was had afterwards to say, to get more details out of them. And I actually had volunteers doing that because I didn't have the time to do it. So it could have been very different had we not thought of that early on, because it could have been that we were actually getting volunteers and putting them at risk. So it was one of those things that I suppose we're very mindful about it. However, when you reflect back on it, you kind of think, gosh, that was it was good we did that, you know. So I think you're very right. You've got to look at the needs of someone and where they fit in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just out of interest, has anyone got any experience of this new culture safety mark, We're Good to Go, that's been implemented by Tourism England? It's a self-assessment system. Anyone heard of it before? No? Okay, just poor me getting all the government daily briefings then and reading them religiously. Oh yeah, I'm obviously too interested in what's going on. I'll try and do a bit more research about that. I'll share that in the follow-up email that will come with the event recording. Are there any more comments that anyone would like to make? We're on lower numbers now, so you can literally just wave at me. No, we're all done. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you so much to all our guest speakers. And hopefully I will see you again very soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Cheerio. Bye-bye.